welcome everybody to another podcast of Southern Dirt Motorsports. We're here at the Northville Vineyard today, and I've got Gary Lorance as my co-host today, and our special guest today, and I'm Randall Davis. Our special guest today is Mr. Wild Bill Austin. Now,
it's not too wild anymore, sadly. It's Mild Bill, and I appreciate you using that term special, but you may have to tone that down a little.
He is
Don't
special.
People expecting too much.
And as you can already tell, he is still wild. Now, a lot of you folks out there have heard his voice a lot over the years. You might not have seen the face, but we're going to show you the face today of
Well,
Wild
I've got
Bill
the
Austin.
perfect face for radio and the perfect voice for newspapers, what I've heard all my life, so it's probably still the same.
Bill was the announcer at many of the local race tracks. That's what makes him a big part of this. It'll probably be hard, but we're going to try to pull some of the stories out of Bill today and some of the things he's seen from the announcer and the fans' point of view. And Bill, where did you get your start in announcing at racetracks? What was your first job in announcing at racetracks?
I guess my first job was when I was lucky enough to be involved in radio. Started out at WJLE in Smithville in 1974, and just was able to buy WSMT from Tolly Wayne Titsworth. Now that's a legend in local racing and an absolute character if there ever was one. But I guess I got my start in love for racing is when my dad would take me around to races. I was born in 1954, and I'm one of the chosen few who was lucky enough to be born in Sparta, Tennessee. And I was born in the 50s and grew up in the 60s and 70s, and man, I tell you, that was just there. If there was ever a better time to be growing up in a better place, and God, I can't imagine where it was. I was just so blessed to have mom and dad that just loved us and loved us all, and we worked hard, but we played hard. And we had a whole lot of fun together. And my dad was a huge race fan. I don't think he knew who was in the Super Bowl. I don't think he knew what team won the World Series. But racing was big where we grew up. And as I've watched you a bunch of times, and I've watched your dad, I tell people all the time, Mario Andretti, if I had my choice to meet Mario Andretti or Earl Lorance, I'd take Earl 10-1. You know,
I'll agree with that.
And there was Bobby Allison, Richard Petty. I've not heard of them, but buddy BK Luna. Now that was a damn race star. Now he was a race driver. Them other guys, I don't know, but now BK Luna was a race driver. But my dad's little store was right there down as you're going toward Burgess Falls, and the old building's still standing there now. But we had a lot of the local race drivers that would come by. And you talk about, for a 10-year-old kid, when Jake Baker would come by and stop at my dad's store, that was something.
Well, Bill, let me ask you, what was the lure of the races that made you want to be there? What was about it that made you just have to be there on Saturday or Friday, whichever the case is?
It was everything. My dad, at that little country store, it was a gathering place for everybody. And boy, there were some characters that lived around there. And I learned to play checkers when I was 6 years old from a guy named Asbury Klaus. And he was a great guy. And then there was a blind gentleman named Bill Wilhite. He taught us how to play dominoes. So when we wasn't working, everybody in the community was hanging around my dad's little country store. And come summertime, come spring, buddy, all that was out the door, and it was racing. So my dad would take me to the races on Friday and Saturday night, and then Monday through Thursday, we'd sit around and talk about it. And it was something. I can still see the memories of, well, they put old Jake over the wall, and then Jake's wife would come by and she'd say, well, you watch this week now, he's going to get him back. I mean, it was a cross between motorized wrestling, kind of what I used to think it was. But you talk about fun, and again, living at kind of a crossroads, I got to meet some of my stars. I mean, people that I idolized, I'd occasionally get to meet. You know, I knew Jake. He lived in the community. James Harness, he'd come by occasionally. Lynn Sliger, I knew Lynn, and Ray Dickerson, and a lot of those guys, and they were nice to me.
When you would first get to a racetrack on a Saturday evening, what was some of the first things you'd start looking for?
Oh, the first things I'd look for is I'd try to get down as close as I could. I could never afford to get in the pits, but I wanted to get as close as I could. And I remember those old engines. I think then I didn't know the rules as a kid and still don't as an adult. But I don't think there was any overhead valve engines. I think flatheads and
That's what
straight
started.
eights and Hudson Hornets.
That's what
You know?
started it all.
Yeah. And,
Where did you start going to the tracks at?
the first track I guess I went to was Sparta Speedway. And we'd go to McMinnville some, we'd go to Hillham some. And I believe there was a racetrack just as you crossed the Burgess Falls Bridge there. I think
Burgess Falls Speedway.
Burgess Falls Speedway. See, that was within 4 or 5 miles of where we lived, and we'd go there a lot.
Now, back at that time, Jake Baker actually drove our car. The 414, he drove it.
He did? Well, your dad, I remember, had 2 cars. He had a little coupe that was 14.
Yeah.
He had a big long sedan that was 414.
Yeah, Jake drove it for a year or two for us, off and on, and
Right.
on up through the years. And I'm restoring that car now, trying to get it back together.
His wife, Ruth, is her 90th birthday was just the other day. So if you get that car restored, let's sure see if we can get her to take a look at it. I'm sure it'd bring back a lot of great memories.
Well, I'd like to get it back together, kind of like what it was, and I'm pretty good ways along on it, so we're going to try to finish it up this summer.
I had heard at one time that BK's car, the one that was the Black Cat Tire Exchange, used to sponsor it, and somebody said that that old car might still be around somewhere. I don't know if it is or not, but it'd sure be nice to see it if it ever was.
Well, let me ask you this, Bill. You've having the career you have announcing and such. What was one of the most memorable events that you can think of that comes to your mind that you saw happen at a racetrack or remember happen at a racetrack, be it a fight, a wreck, or
Well, there were several fights. I used to do some announcing when Ed Metcalf and BK on the racetrack at Baxter.
when they had a fight, did you call the fight like there was?
Let's get ready to rumble! And people start coming out of the stands when I put that call out there, and we'd have more fun, Of course,
They'll
those
have
guys.
to bring them back next week.
Well, I'll tell you, and we did, and I'll never forget the Baxter Bullet. God bless him, he's passed on. But you talk about a fun character, and you could count on him to either win, wreck, or fight, and sometimes all three.
And who was this guy?
Mark Martin.
Okay.
And he was a character, and I loved watching him and loved announcing it. Now, Tolly did a lot of the calling over there, and I'd come in early when Tolly was doing something else or something, so I never had the full-time job. Of course, basically didn't pay anything, so I wouldn't like I was jockeying to get it.
Can you tell the folks out there that don't know a little bit about Tolly Wayne and who he was?
Tolly Wayne started out in radio at WAKI in McMinnville, Tennessee, and he bought WSMT in 1976, and I bought it from him in 1980. But Tolly was an absolute character and a great race announcer. Tolly was a kind of radio guy that I never was. Tolly was dedicated. Now, he'd sign on at 6 o'clock in the morning, he'd do the news. Tolly Wayne would average probably 15 to 16 hours a day working. And he not only would announce the races, he would write articles that they put in the newspapers. And I mean, the local racetrack, man, that was big news, who won the races. So, and I think that's one thing that we've lost when we've lost local ownership of our local media is,
I agree with that.
and I don't think America's better for it. I think we're worse for it, but we digress. But there were just so many fun times of racing, and I just had so much fun. It's just unbelievable. Both as a kid growing up and watching these great guys race, and it was just it's a great family atmosphere. I mean, my dad had turned me loose. I'd get in the door, he'd give me $1. We were talking about that earlier, and sometimes I'd take money home, but he'd give me $1 and I could have a hamburger, Coke, hot dog if I wanted one, and you could do that on $1.
Well,
Times have changed.
That's one of the things. Go ahead, Gary.
We was talking about, the day, at the time when we first started, it was $1 to get in.
Yeah.
Now, where could you go and spend $1 at and get the entertainment you could get at a racetrack?
Absolutely.
You see cars, and might see a fight,
Right.
whatever there.
And your friends were there.
Yeah, you had, there's everybody with.
Yep.
So,
And we never leave my dad's store that we wouldn't have a car full. And they'd be 3 or 4 carfuls, that would go. And I mean, you'd see people, you'd see people that you only saw at the races, and I mean, if you had a little girl, you'd meet her at the racetrack. I mean, it wasn't a bad way to spend for a country boy to get off the farm. That's a pretty good place to go on Friday and Saturday night.
The concession stands too had really good food.
Well, they did.
If you got close to a racetrack, you could find it because you could smell it.
You could smell the food.
When you were getting there.
Well, I compared it to county fair food. There's no better food to be than I've had at the White County Fair. I've had Five Guys hamburgers. I've had them $20 steak burgers. I've had every kind of hamburger you could have. But at the White County Fair or Sparta Speedway, I still put up as some of the best hamburgers I've ever had in my life. But it was fun.
Was there maybe an accident that you saw? Now, I know there used to be some pretty, you would think on the shorter tracks, you wouldn't have that type or harder crashes, but believe me, you can crash hard on a quarter-mile track. Is there any of those that you remember that stands out in your memory?
I remember Jake being pushed over the racetrack and completely off the side. I mean, went out of sight.
Now, this was Jake who?
Jake Baker.
Okay.
And I remember Jake leaving the track completely, and might have been driving your dad's car. I don't know what car he was driving then, but I remember leaving the track completely in a cloud of dust. You could see on the other side. And of course, I knew Jake. I mean, he was a friend. I thought, man, oh man, I hope he ain't hurt. And then somebody, they'd all, I guess the fans then, I don't guess we had safety crews back in those days, did we?
I can remember when they first started bringing an ambulance there, but it was a hearse.
Right, the Hunter Funeral Home.
It was
provided one at
right.
Sparta.
And when they separated the hearse from true ambulances, that was a great step. There wasn't safety rules back then, though. It's amazing that anybody, myself included, survived those race cars. And got a good friend, Roy Freeze, that restores them. I didn't know how shabby they were until he started restoring those things. And being where you was at, you got to watch the safety.
Or the lack of safety. I'll never forget, I think the guys would take old drive shafts and actually make the roll cages.
I've seen that many times.
Out of old drive shafts because it was a little cheaper than buying the steel tubing. So they'd buy old drive shafts and weld them together. But after Jake went over there and all the dust and stuff was flying, boy, I was scared to death. My little heart was beating. And a couple of the fans, of course, they came up. I think they'd started out with white T-shirts on, but by the time the third or fourth race, that was at Sparta. But they come climbing up over the wall, they was signaling that he was all right. And they drug the car out, and boy, the next week, Jake put that guy over the wall. So it was something, we just had an absolute ball watching them. And boy, what fun it was. And I'd get up close to the motors, and I remember as a kid, I'd sit around and doodle. I was drawing airplanes and race cars instead of listening to my school teachers at Cassville School. And that's when the racetrack was right behind Cassville. All I could think of was, man, I wish she'd shut up. Let's be Friday and we go racing tonight. But sadly, I didn't learn too much. But I'd draw them flatheads.
Well, who was some of the flagmen that was at the track?
I don't remember the flagman, but I remember another memorable racetrack is, I think it was at Sparta, it might have been McMinnville. Ivy Hillis was calling it, and BK, somebody had hit BK or BK had hit them or something, but anyway, BK lost control of his car, and he was coming right at the flag stand, and the flagman jumped out, and he either hit the flag stand or almost hit it, and Ivy was, he had a microphone, and I think Ivy was standing pretty close to the flagman then, because I remember, hold that car, BK, and boy, by that time, everybody was diving out of the flag stand, but it was a pretty memorable crash as well.
Well, holding the microphone like you did, being the announcer, did you ever get carried away and say something you might not should have said?
Let's not go there. I had a tendency sometimes, since the races were on Friday night, I might have had an adult beverage or two before I got there, and then could have had maybe 2 or 12 or
that made
something.
You see more clearly.
It did. It brought everything into perfect perspective for me, and it was the dust. I was always worried about the dust affecting my voice, and I noticed that Miller Lights would cut through that dust about as good as anything would, and, but we had so much fun going to the races. I mean, it was a carnival, and like you said, it was like a Roman tragedy. You had your good guys, you had your bad guys. I mean, it was just so much fun.
Bill was one of the few guys that no matter who wrecked or what happened, he could see exactly what happened, and it didn't matter who disagreed.
Exactly.
He still was the one that saw it happen, and there
Right.
wasn't going to be any
And you
argument
just told
about
them
it.
just like how it was then, didn't you?
Well, I was trying too much. I didn't want to get anybody mad at me. I knew that tempers were flaring pretty good, so I didn't want to blame anybody else. But I tell you what, it was sure some great racing, and it was just so much fun. And another involvement I had in racing is later on after I bought WSNT, I was lucky enough to sponsor 2 different cars. I sponsored a Hall of Famer that was just inducted into the Hall of Fame, Larry DeLong, and he had he raced a car and he painted my radio station frequencies on it, 105, and that was Larry's number, was 105. And Larry raced, and Larry did pretty well with it. And
Larry is and was a good racer.
I'm gonna tell another story about another guy, and again, Chuck, I'm gonna talk about you, I know you're gone, buddy, but man, we had a lot of fun together. But anyway, his name was Chuck Frazier, and Chuck was, let's just say he was never at the front of the pack type of guy. But I love Chuck, and like we talked about before, everybody can't be stars. Everybody can't be winners, but they wasn't a finer guy than him, and he was a winner in life. And him and my buddy Clifford McBride, and I used to hang around a lot together, and we'd work on his car. And I had 105 painted on the side of that car. And Chuck would have a tendency sometimes to wreck or crash or get upside down. And Mouse told him one time, said, "You need to start selling the bottom of that car." So that's what people are saying. He said, "You're upside down." Said, "You need to sell some space on the bottom of that car."
Well, did you know Bill DeLong, Larry's dad?
I didn't know him, but I met Larry.
He was a great guy, great
He was a real character then.
Well, Larry was. They told a story on Larry about taking the motor out of his wife's Blazer and putting in his car one time. I don't know if it's true or not, but they told that story on him.
I think we heard a story like that, didn't we, Gary?
Yeah.
So it must be true.
Now, Bill, he liked to run on Saturday night, but he liked to listen to the Grand Ole Opry too. And he had a radio in his race car, and when they stopped on the front straightaway, he'd have that thing blasted wide open. He'd be listening to the Grand Ole Opry while he was racing.
But buddy, I tell you what, it was just so much fun racing. And we were talking about those different motors. I remember somebody had a Packard, and I'm trying to think who it was, but they had a straight 8.
That was Cat. I believe it was Cat
Was it Cat
Styles.
Styles had that? But now that was something, and that was a rare engine. The Hudson Hornets, there was about 2 or 3 cars that ran the Hudson Hornet. Boy, I remember they had 2 carburetors on them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that was
didn't know
Charles Hulley and Chigger Parker.
Yeah, but they had those Hudson Hornets, and man, they were fast. What, now you
Well,
guys,
BK run a Hudson.
he ran a Hornet for a while.
Yeah, they run a Hornet for a pretty good while.
Well, now let me ask you guys some technical questions that maybe the people out there don't know, because I'm sure I don't know. But from a fan's point of view, about how many RPMs could you get one of them old flathead Fords turn? Would they turn 5,000?
Probably about 4,500, wasn't it, Gary? Something.
We start out, we always turn 5,000. Then if you get a little bit behind, you always, tighten it up a little bit. We got to turn to 5,500 then, but they would turn around 5,000, 5,500.
And they could hold that for a while?
Yeah, they could run on and on that.
Yeah.
And now that Hudson most time about 5,000 because it was longer stroke. They had a longer stroke engine.
Yeah, that thing had I think 4.5-inch stroke.
Yeah, they didn't. I don't think
They weren't a
turned
high
over 5.
RPM, but they was a torquey engine.
That's kind of what I figured the Packard, that straight 8 Packard was.
It was a torquey engine too.
And
It
it
was,
had a lot of cubic inches. See,
Right.
that thing you had a lot more cubic inches.
It was a long, I remember that engine was a lot longer.
Yeah.
Obviously being a straight 8 than the rest of them.
well, then back in the day too, the Packard was one of the few straight 8s that you could actually buy some speed equipment for, performance equipment. you could actually get an aluminum head for them that took some of the weight off of them.
And
After
flywheels,
conversion,
you
yeah.
can get a little flywheel stuff. And the Hudson and stuff like that, they had come from out in, like on the salt flats. They had a lot of records on salt flats and stuff. And
Well, I
then
think Fonty Flock, in the early days of NASCAR, I think he won the first NASCAR championship or something, driving Hudson.
they did. He run the Hudson for a long time.
Probably Hudson was one of the first. I know the Flathead Ford was the king of everything, but Hudson was probably one of the first real performance engines out there. They even had a supercharger on them, or a turbocharger, I guess.
Two carburetors.
Yeah,
and
they
they very little equipment. They did come on the factory that you could put on them that would make them faster.
Kind of ahead of their time as far as
They
performance
was.
goes.
Well, Ike Turner built the Charles Hullett Hudsons, and he was a mechanic ahead of his time. And he's got some good stories about what he did to those engines to make them perform, and it was unbelievable, the things that he did. He used a Pontiac piston in them, so they was unbelievable, the stuff that Ike could do to one of them.
Now, let me ask you more some questions. I'm gonna get my age away here now. You never did do any of that what do they call it, the Crazy 8 racing?
No, figure eight.
Figure
racing.
8 racing, that's what, well, it was crazy if you did it. I think you'd have to be
I
about
was
crazy.
crazy, but not that crazy.
I remember, I think it was it Don Hobbs or somebody?
That's how Don started, I think, was in the figure eight racing.
He was I'd watched them, and they'd only have about one or two of those a year. Because I don't think they had them all the time, probably couldn't get enough cars to fill the field. But he was the only guy that would never even slow down or look when it came to where they crossed. But you talk about and I remember there was a country music song called "Don't Go Near Them Figure Eights." I forgot who wrote it and sang it, but it was I'd hear it occasionally on WSMT, of
Well,
course.
the figure eight racing became popular for a while.
Right.
And then the cars started, they let them get up too fast.
Right.
And they started, a lot of people started getting hurt out of them.
Right.
So that pretty much eliminated them. The insurance problem stopped that too.
Well, the roll cages, I'm sure that you guys built cars, race cars, but they're probably nothing like they are today.
Oh no, they weren't. They were primitive. I mean, safety was non-existent back then in the first days of them.
They would wait till something, which they still do, they'd wait kind of, when somebody got hurt,
Really bad.
they would actually, that's when the safety equipment, they'd work on that. And then they'd go on, but what happened was, when they first started out, the cars wasn't running that fast. And then as they got faster, they become more dangerous, and then they'd have to put more and more safety equipment on.
The promoters were really smart back then to not let us start running overhead valve
Sure.
engines as soon as they came out, because the cars weren't safety enough to handle the overhead
And the
valve engines.
expense as well.
Yeah,
You know,
it was a big changeover from the flatheads to the overhead valve engines.
I'm not sure the racing got any better. It probably got faster and more expensive, but I doubt if it got any better.
I doubt that it was.
You know, but you know, you were talking about how fast the cars were, and of course, again, I'm like every kid that's a race fan, deep down, I think I'm a driver. You know, and I mean, you know, and then I later became a pilot, and I was a crop duster, you know, and I thought, man, that race car driving, you know, I'm dodging these power lines out here at 120 or 30 miles an hour, no ag cat. I said,
So that's what you did when you weren't talking.
I did I was a pilot, was lucky enough to get to fly. I got to fly Bobby Hamilton Sr. I got to fly Bobby a few times when his regular pilot was sick or something, and got to know Bobby a little bit. And I got to fly Bobby to his race in Homestead when he clinched, I guess, his only championship. He clinched the truck championship, and I was lucky enough to get to fly Bobby in that race, and got to know Bobby and later on in his life. And
Preacher Hamilton used to do a lot of work on Marty Robbins' cars too in Nashville.
The Preacher Hamilton was his grandpa, and his daddy worked there too with him. At one time in Nashville and around down there, if you didn't have a Preacher Hamilton car, you didn't run up front.
Right.
And Bill Johnson, I think they was only two people in Nashville that actually built fast cars.
Competitive cars.
And they had a full-time job with Marty Robbins, and they had just different ones there, and they kept them a new car all the time there.
We used to go to the Nashville 420, and that was 420 laps around that 5/8 mile track. But now to go to that was really something. But it was also, what you loved is you'd love to see. I think BK might have raced in that a time or two.
He raced at Nashville some, I know.
I know he did, and let's see, what was Sterling Marlin's dad's name?
Cuckoo.
Cuckoo Marlin.
Clifton.
Yeah, but it was really something to see Cuckoo Marlin, if he could beat, the regular NASCAR guys. And I was there one year, I think Richard Petty won it, but I think Cuckoo came in the top 10 or something.
Well, Bill, I gotta ask you this one more question. What is the most memorable thing that you, out of all your years of announcing and being at racetrack, what is the one most memorable thing that stands out that you can think of?
That's pretty easy. We had a guy that came to Sparta. This would have been about 82 or 83. And his name was Ron Glass. And he was a Hollywood stuntman. He'd been driving at a lot of famous Hollywood movies and stuff. And I forgot who owned the racetrack then. It was at the Sparta Speedway. And I had decided that we were going, but Ron would be on my morning radio show. I'd sign on every morning, play country music from 6 till 9, then go out and I'd try to sell radio ads. But Ron would come by and we'd get talking. And of course, it's kind of like the wrestling, you were hyping it up, and I was telling him, I said, the race car driving, man, I've been a pilot. Race car driving ain't nothing. I can do that. And of course, I was just, trying to ballyhoo the big race that was coming on that weekend. And so we kept talking it up, and finally, we decided that I was gonna race him. I was gonna race Ron Glass. And so we go out there, and Ron goes to every car dealer in town, and they give him some kind of old junker. And I think Ed Rogers had given him about a $50 or $100 car, and I think Keith Norris had done the same, and I'm sure the Ford dealer then probably gave him one. And we go down there, and during the racing program, again, might have been one of the days where I might have had some hops or something, some of the malt beverages before we got down there. But I forgot if it was during the race or before the race. But Joe Simmons had pulled one of his old tractors. He had a nice tractor, but it had an old trailer there, and he pulled it out across the racetrack. And Ron Glass comes around the damn racetrack and goes underneath that trailer. And it just shears the top of that car off. Of course, I found out later they'd sawed, most of it off or cut it off or something, and they'd sheared that off. And I was their special announcer, I guess, that night, or doing something. But anyway, part of the deal is I challenged Ron to a race, and I believe Fat Cat Howell loaned me his car. And Ron, I'm racing in this $100 car with no top on it. And Ron's standing there just with that helmet sticking up, and I'm in a race car, and I've got, I'm strapped in, and got the helmet on. I'm in Fat Cat's car, and down feet on that runway. And I'm trying. I'm trying as hard as I can. I later got to race down in Nashville in the legend car races. I had a great friend of mine that owned some legend cars, and he was crazy enough to let me race them one time. And I was down there, and I got in his legend car at the Nashville track, and that was in July. And as you guys probably know, that is like racing on glass. It's so slick. I get out there, and I'm racing, and after about 4 or 5 laps out there by myself, I said, man, I hope they got the timing clocks on. I have set the track record. Nobody has ever been around this track as fast as I just went around it. They put them other cars out there. Hell, I thought I was tied to a stump. They went by me like I was sitting still. I made 3 laps, pulled a car in, and Don Arkin, we called him Rabbit owned the car. He said, Bill, something wrong with the car? I said, we got a bad short between the steering wheel and the driver's seat. I said, we got a bad disconnect here. The guys that are going slow are going fast. So from a fan's perspective, if a guy's out there and you're watching him and you think, man, I drive as fast as he does, trust me, you probably can't. It was amazing. And that's why I got so much respect for you guys.
Well, Bill, thank you for being here.
Thanks
Thank
for
you for
listening to
sharing
me.
the stories with us. I can tell there's lots more stories in there.
Well, I'm nothing if not a wealth of stories, and I'm like every other salesman you've ever seen. I'm seldom correct, but I'm never in doubt. So, and I never let the truth get in the way of a good story, and I'm trying not to do that here. But
And just for that, we're gonna invite you back,
Well-
because we've gotta finish these stories up or get deeper into some of them.
well, we'll have a good time, I promise you
And with
that.
that, Bill, thank you for allowing us to share the stories with you. Thank you for being here with Southern Dirt Motorsports. And thank all of y'all out there. And I'll ask you again to watch us on YouTube, subscribe to us, like us on Facebook.
And keep them cars and letters coming in.
Right. That keeps us alive, keeps us going. And we want to thank the Northfield Vineyard again for allowing us to use their facilities today. And again, folks, if you have any social events coming up, a wedding, a party, birthday party, whatever, please give them a call, give them a shot at hosting the event for you. I think it'll serve you and them well. Thanks again for watching. Like us, please subscribe to us. Thank you.
Thank you.